Hello folks and welcome to another Legend Scale review. Today we're going to be taking a look at Iron Factory's latest release, and this is IF-EX52T, Kochuu Norimune Tsuki. Now I probably butchered that, but these samurai names are always a bit of a mouthful. He is a representation of Autobot Drift. Now Iron Factory have already done an IDW style drift, but this version is based on how he appears in the Age of Extinction movie. And yes, it is a little bit strange to see a character design from the live-action movies get taken on by a third-party Legends company. But, I mean, it's really just because it hasn't been done before. And yeah, it makes sense that they would pick him for this Iron Samurai Sublime that they have going, given that his base design is already heavily inspired by Samurai. The sculpt is pretty standard fare for Iron Factory. He does have some segmented armor detailing on the arms and also the chest grill there. But apart from that, I think the samurai stylization is actually a little bit less dominant than it has been for the likes of some of the early figures like Loud Convoy and Bludgeon. The head sculpt does depart a little bit from the movie design, but that's probably so that it doesn't stand out too much from the other Iron Factory stuff. It's still based on a samurai helmet and still has that very striking golden face. He's mostly molded in these two shades of dark blue plastic with some black, and then a fair bit of neon blue and silver metallic grey paint, and then some details picked out in red, silver and gold. There's one thing you can say about the Iron Samurai figures is that they do not skimp on the paint. Now, as is the gimmick for this subline, you can see his alt mode parts are designed to evoke the look of samurai armor, with these big shoulder pads and the armored skirt. Now, this tends to be something you either love or hate, and it doesn't always work for every character. I think it definitely does make sense for this character, but what I have heard a lot of people say is that they don't like the skirt, for this figure in particular. Don't like how big it is, don't like the shape of it. And it's true, if I take Cyclonus here, who also had quite a big skirt, even in his case, it doesn't come below his knees. Whereas in Drift's case, comes way past them and makes him look almost as if he's got a big pair of baggy shorts. Now, you can fold it behind, out of the way, if you don't like it, and even rotate that up around so it becomes back kibble instead. Just like that. A little bit of an eyesore, but if you don't like the skirt, it's an option. If you don't like how that looks, the whole assembly is on a ball joint, if you can see that in there. So you can pop the entire thing off. Like so. Leaves him a little bit naked, but perhaps a little cleaner looking. But this does reveal something else about the figure. What we have here is essentially more than half of a car. Yet he's a bit of a shell former. So I think it's perfectly fair if you don't like this. I think it's off-putting. However, I would urge you to hold your judgment for now. I think what they've done is well worth it, and I'm going to explain why in just a bit. In terms of articulation, he has a ball joint at the head. The shoulders hinge up and down, which is quite good for dynamic sword poses. Then there's a ball joint in there as well, so you get the full rotation. This little piece that sticks out can cause clearance issues, so it depends on the pose, but you may have to work to get it to sit properly. There is a hinge just above the bicep, and then the elbows and wrists are each on ball joints. The waist is also on a ball joint, so you get a little bit of tilt in each direction, and also the full rotation. Now, I'll move the skirt out of the way so you can see. The hips are on ball joints, so you get a decent amount of range forward, back, out to the sides. But what's really impressive here is that the skirts also have that full range of articulation due to a series of hinges and ball joints. They have, I'll show you here, a hinge in here, and then a ball joint here and here. And what that does is that means that whatever position you put the legs in, the skirt can follow. So you can have the forward splits, and the skirt is able to follow. And same for the side splits. You work with those ball joints, you can get it to follow the legs. Now, that's something they haven't managed on the other Iron Samurai figures. I found that with the likes of Bludgeon, Cyclonus, Live Convoy doesn't really have as much of a skirt, but even him to an extent. The skirt had articulation, the legs had articulation, but for certain poses, the skirt would get in the way. It just didn't have the articulation it needed to not look awkward. So you'd have certain poses where it was just discontinuous, it didn't work. That has not been the case here. Any pose I've tried to get him in, the skirt has been able to work with it. Even sitting down poses, you can have the back bit facing out the way, flush with the floor, and these going forward. It's really well engineered, it's quite impressive. But yeah, moving on. The thighs can rotate. The knees have a double hinge. And then the ankles are on hinges, as well as ball joints. And the foot has a hinge in the middle. Drift does come with a few accessories. He has the 4 usual sets of hands that Iron Factory figures come with. He's got the closed fists on him at the minute, then a pair of gripping hands, a pair of angle gripping hands which are open at the sides, and then a pair of fully open hands. Now these just pop on and off at a ball joint. Now, I'll demonstrate with the gripping hands here. The connection is strong enough that he can hold the sword perfectly fine. That's not going anywhere. Not too loose. But if you apply too much pressure to the end of the sword, they will pop off pretty easily. So if you're trying to pose him while he's holding his sword, that can be a bit of a pain. It's something to watch out for. My copy isn't too bad. I have seen some copies where the connection is much looser. So it will just depend what yours is like. You may have to try and tighten those a bit to save your sanity. But yeah, something to watch out for. They are only rubber, so over time these may deform and get a bit looser. I'm not sure. Haven't had the figure for long enough. But yeah, he also has this large sword and 2 smaller knives. Now each of these has its corresponding sheath. There are 2 smaller sheaths for the knives. They will slot in like so. I should note, the knife sheaths were loose on my copy, so out of the box, they would just fall straight out. The only thing keeping them in was gravity. I just put a little bit of kiki around the slot, and now they fit perfectly fine. So yeah, so to avoid losing those, that might be a good idea. Then there's also this larger sheath for the sword. It actually has 2 slots. For robot mode, we want to use this lower slot, slide it in like this, and that holds pretty securely. That's not going to go anywhere. And then this little piece is an adapter that goes onto one of the pegs on the sword sheath, and we take that, and that allows you to attach the drift back while keeping it clear of all the kibble. Now there is also this other sheath which looks a lot like the knife sheaths. This is actually an alternate one for the sword. The hole is slightly bigger than what's on the knives. So if you want to use that for the sword, you can do that. But yeah, he has an abundance of 3mm ports. He's got a pair on his shoulders, a pair on his thighs, and a pair on his rear. So you can pick your favorite. I usually use the ones on his thighs, and those will just peg in. And there you have it. For some size comparisons, there he is with the original Iron Factory Drift. That's him with some of the more recent Iron Factory releases, Seaspray and Sandstorm. Some others who appeared in Age of Extinction, we've got Iron Factory Hound and Grimlock there. And then some of our constants, we've got Iron Factory Runabout, Core Class Shockwave, and a Lego Stormtrooper. And then there is the lineup of all the Iron Samurai figures so far. To get him transformed, I want to first remove all of the accessories, make sure you get that adapter as well. Set those to the side for the moment. Then move the shoulders down on their hinge, down and out, so that this piece has clearance to come forward. That will then hinge up and over the head to line up with this panel. Then you want to move the skirt back out the way so that it has clearance to rotate up and around like so. Next thing, each thigh is going to rotate 180 degrees. The knees are on their double hinge. You want to collapse the leg down on that. There isn't much clearance there. It could be quite difficult to get it the first time, but it should get a bit easier once you've managed to do it once. So you have to give it a little bit of force. Now, the ankles, rotate around to the sides. I'm going to bring the feet around into this position. Same on the other side. So you have something that looks like this. Now, let's flatten all this skirt stuff out. I'm going to rotate the front bits down so they'll cover the legs. These wheel arches tab into place like this. Same on both sides. And I want to flatten out this windscreen piece. Line everything up. Now, each foot has a tab, or a slot for a tab, that will tab into here. And you may have to adjust the angle of the foot to get it, but they just tap in like this. Now we will bring back the large sheath piece, remove the sword, set this aside for now, and we're going to remove the adapter. That has a little tab that will go into this slot, like this. Now we're going to use the pegs and tabs on the sheath to secure it in this gap between the legs. There will be corresponding ports and slots on each leg. And there we go. Now, there are some gaps left just due to the size of the tabs and the pegs. So it may look a little bit gappy, but that is how it's supposed to look. Now, we want to rotate the shoulders so that they're in line in front of the car, and then move those up so that they peg into place, like so. Now the doors will hinge out, rotate, slot here, tab in underneath the window. Just have to maneuver that into place, and that will fill on the side of the car. Same on the other side. And then last thing, rotate the arms so that they're like this. You want the hands facing this way as well, and collapse them into the space underneath the car. If you don't have them oriented correctly, they won't fit. And there you have the car mode. Now this alt mode is quite clearly inspired by the Bugatti Veyron that Drift appeared as in the movie. And honestly, it's a pretty decent car mode. It's got some visible seams, those hinge and ball joints sticking out, and of course the end is a bit gappy just to how that sheath fits in. But all things considered, I do think it's a pretty clean car mode. Iron Factory is not exactly renowned for their alt modes, especially these Iron Samurai figures have had really substandard ones, in my opinion, so this is a welcome change. The transformation is a little bit fiddly, but that's just inherent to the design. If you're used to New Age's stuff, like, it'll be a piece of cake. The inclusion of this adapter piece as a central exhaust pipe was quite clever, I think, especially since some of the Bugatti Veyrons do have a central exhaust pipe. Weapons can be stored in this mode. You can bring in the big sword, that will clip into the top, like that. And now that's not the same position it goes in robot mode, just to avoid any confusion. Then the knives can go in any of those ports. There you have nice symmetrical storage. For a few alt mode size comparisons, here he is with the original Iron Factory Drift, IF-EX52T. And now, which one has the better robot mode is more subjective, but I feel like here there really isn't much contest. The new alt mode is just a lot better than the old. And then there he is with Core Class Shockwave, the Iron Factory Run Amok, and a Lego Stormtrooper. And that is Iron Factory IF-EX52T. This figure ended up being a very pleasant surprise for me, actually. I'm not particularly attached to Bayverse Drift as a character, and the figure didn't look all that special from the promotional renders, but he's actually ended up being one of my personal favourites from Iron Factory this year. As somebody who has all of the figures in the Samurai subline so far, I would say that this one is actually the best, at the very least in terms of the engineering. He's got all the dynamic articulation that the others have. He's got a very good alt mode, which none of the others have. And no quality control issues that make me feel like I'm defusing a bomb every time I transform him. Looking at you, Bludgeon. On the other hand, he's quite fiddly. He does technically involve a degree of shell forming, and the robot mode design does look a little bit odd with the big baggy shorts. Now, my copy didn't have any quality control issues, but as is common for Iron Factory, that's not been the case for everyone. Fiddly figure with poor quality control is a nightmare, so you do run that risk. You may have your patience tested with this figure, but I would personally recommend him. If you're a fan of the Samurai designs, he does pull off the look without compromising his alt mode, and it's a version of a character you don't see too often. So I think he's worth picking up. But yeah, that pretty much concludes the review. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.